Stubbs the Zombie. Just like its protagonist, a game out of time. You see, this game initially came out 16 years ago for the original Xbox, where it tried to differentiate itself, turning the zombie game concept on its head by letting you play as a zombie, taking a much more humorous approach at that, given that the whole story premise is basically a zombie chasing after the love of his life? On life? The resolution has been upscaled, and we get a widescreen aspect ratio for this re-release. But aside from that, there haven't been any design changes or quality of life improvements. So does the gameplay still manage to hold up to this day? Or was Stubbs better left buried in the past? Well, hold on to your brains, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and let's find out! The game takes place in the 1960s, in the city of Punchbowl, which has that 60s style vision of the future. You play as Stubbs the Zombie, who just recently rose from the dead and is on a search to reunite with his sweetheart Maggie Monday. The game is an old school action game, and you will be going from area to area, eating the brains of everyone in between. You will have several tools at your disposal, which will unlock as you progress with the game. The most interesting of which is a mind control attack, where you throw out your hand to latch onto an enemy's head and puppeteer them. You will gain access to that enemy's weapons, which can come in super handy. Aside from these, there are some gut grenades, or you can roll out your head like a bowling ball to do some AoE damage, or release some gas to do a stun. So yeah, the possession hand is the MVP here, at least in terms of interesting abilities. You are a zombie, so of course you will be trying to eat the brains of your enemies. Every time you do, you will regain some health, recharge your abilities, and more importantly, raise them as a new member of your army. The zombies will kind of follow you around and engage enemies on their own, so one of the most satisfying parts of the gameplay is building that horde as you progress through a level. The maps, however, feel very empty. They of course have some enemies and also civilians who serve as fodder for your army. But aside from that, there just isn't anything else, no interesting areas for you to explore or details to find to enhance the lore. There really isn't any reason to go out of your way to explore an area. The enemies also feel very outdated since the AI is pretty basic and dumb, and they don't feel different enough. They basically just shoot. Some may have shotguns, rifles, or even laser guns, some may even fly. But aside from some very rare elites with a chainsaw, you are always just trying to cut the distance between you to snack on their grey matter. Avoid taking damage for some time and Stubbs will start to regenerate itself. This is way more effective than the measly life you get from eating brains. So sometimes the game devolves into attacking one member of a group of enemies, going back into hiding to regenerate some health, and then repeating until the pack is gone. The AI is so dumb it won't chase you or anything, and I wish at least they would have made the health you get from brains much more significant to encourage more active gameplay. The game also seems to autosave when standing still and not taking damage, so sometimes if you don't have this in mind, you will lose quite some progress on death. The game has various levels of difficulty, but like most of the games back then, once you select one, you won't be able to change it throughout, so I would definitely suggest sticking with normal. I went with hard, and it's not like the game is unbeatable or anything, but this game is cheap, and I'm not talking about the price tag, but you will sometimes get unlucky and get sniped 2 times in a row, and it can get really tiring repeating areas multiple times, not really changing your approach, but just trying to get RNG's favor. The gameplay has some variation here and there, like a dance battle in the middle of a game, or even some vehicle combat, which pretty much feels like Halo 1. This game was after all made in that game's engine, and it was one of its original big marketing push. In general, the core concept of the gameplay here seems like a good idea, but its execution and supporting structure is very much anchored to old, outdated design principles. If you're looking for that old, clunky style of gameplay, good news, this is definitely here. But for someone looking for a fun game, sure, you might get that here, but it will also come with a ton of baggage. As for the story, well, it's pretty basic. You're a zombie who is always chasing after your old love, Maggie Monday. It is very comedic and doesn't take itself too seriously, which puts Stubbs on some pretty hilarious situations. It is also that sort of cartoon-like premise where the protagonist has some very simple and innocent motivation, and his actions unwittingly trigger all this chaos and havoc around him, which is shown in a ton of cutscenes throughout the game. The game does have voice acting, which is very welcome since all the jokes are much better served this way. Like I said, the game takes place in the city of Punchbowl, which has that sort of 60s style vision of the future, so expect flying cars and chunky service robots, one of which has a very particular way of pumping gas into your vehicle. As for the presentation, the game is 3D, but it obviously looks pretty dated, since more than 15 years have passed since its original release. But it didn't age terribly bad, especially considering they went for that retro futuristic look and overall comedic approach, so you won't have your immersion broken by the old looking graphics, since the game never tried to take itself too seriously. There is also this movie style filter which I'm really not a fan of, especially given how many of the levels are already pretty dark and blurry, and even when they're not, whenever you mind control a human, you will go into a black and white mode where it can be sometimes impossible to tell what you're aiming at. I would have much preferred they went for a more bright and colorful world to complement not only the retro futuristic look, but the comedic nature of the zombie love story. The sound design, although dated for sure, I'd say it's pretty good. The soundtrack, especially in the dance-off battle, has some pretty recognizable retro songs, and the sound effects throughout the game complement the overall theme they're going for. From the goofy barbershop quartet-style enemies who'll sing their lines, to the random comment given by your victims, like someone saying they've never been disarmed while having his arm literally dismembered. As for the performance, you'd think a 16-year-old game wouldn't have any trouble running smoothly on the Switch. Well, you'd be wrong, it stutters a lot. And while not game-breaking, it is certainly noticeable. Worse yet is that the game has a ton of crashes. I've had the game crash 5 times in my playthrough of around 9 hours, and mixed with the bad saving/checkpoint system meant that I had to retread a lot of the game. So again, this is where I would like to remind you to play in the normal difficulty. Many times I had to restart the game since the zombies would bug out and not interact with an objective or other bygone problems of that era. As for the price, the game is $20 or your local equivalent, which is the same price for PC, so we get no Switch tax here. The game is roughly 8 hours long, however, there is not much reason to come back after that since there aren't any secrets to find or unlockables to get. It does feature a 2-player co-op mode, which of course if you have a couch buddy will always make the experience much better. But aside from that, don't expect to get much mileage out of this game. Overall, Stubbs the Zombie scores a 4 out of 10. So yeah guys, I don't think this game manages to keep up with today's standards. It has some pretty outdated design ideas, and could only really recommend it for people looking for that very particular clunky experience. And even then, it doesn't have the most stable frame rate and it has some serious crashing issues. Sorry Stubbs, not even the Switch could bring you back to life, man. So that was my review of Stubbs the Zombie for the Nintendo Switch. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful, and do let me know what you think. Should they have reworked the visuals, quality of life, or maybe even design decisions? Even if you haven't played this game, what would make you more interested in a re-release such as this? Or maybe you're okay with them not touching anything and leaving the game this way, for people looking for that old school experience. Drop me a comment with your thoughts on this. Anyway, I will be uploading more content to the channel, so make sure you subscribe for that. I hope you have a fantastic day, and remember guys, stay engaged!